Oh, sorry. Oh, um, I've already checked it in. I've already checked it in the UAV directory. There's a new version of the BioFox Oh, sorry. Now the microphone switched on. I'm just looking at the chat. Did somebody... Oh, yeah, wait, no, nothing new there. Welcome for the last presentation of today. As I said, this year there's a small amount of presentations compared to previous years. That's largely due to the fact that I've been out of order in the month of April due to a potential mild but COVID-19 infection. So hopefully next year we'll have a full house again in terms of visitors and presentations. Next up is one of our community celebrities by now, Alex Taylor. He always comes up with these nifty little tools and things to make life easier. You've already been more people have been using his tool probably than you want to realize. Mini LVM, that makes management of LVM volumes a whole lot easier. If you want to understand why it's easier, I invite you to use LVM command line text utility from IBM, and then you will see the difference. His CUPS printer wizard utility, the new NAPS that replaces MPTS. There's a whole laundry list of stuff that he has worked on. This is a pre-recorded presentation, but as I said, Alex is available to answer any questions. And just for the record, Alex Taylor is saying here on IRC that making him blush. But yes, Alex, you know, some credit is certainly justified, since a lot of these tools just have that extra cutting edge in terms of user friendliness that other tools haven't taken the end user into account. And sometimes your software does it a whole lot better than certain components originally developed by the Institute of Black Magic, as some people prefer to it. But can you run the recording, please?
Hello everyone. In this presentation, I'm going to talk a bit about some of my recent software updates, and in particular the ones that I've released in the last year, or in other words, since the last Warpstock Europe. Now, my recent work over the last year or so has obviously included stuff that I've done for ArcaOS, which includes the ANPM presentation, which I've covered separately. In terms of my personal software development projects, I've released updated versions of several programs, and I've also released a new program just this month, and so I'll talk a little about all of these. Now, I've had this program, Universal Clock, for some time. I think the first release was close to 10 years ago. But I haven't really publicized it very much because until recently I didn't really feel that it was kind of polished enough to be a viable program for a lot of people. Since the last couple of releases, though, I feel like that's changed. So I did 2 releases of Universal Clock in late 2019, close on together. And so the major updates in these 2 releases collectively are, first of all, it now has a graphical time zone selector, so you can select your time zone by selecting the closest city from the GUI. And also, another major feature I added was the display of sunrise and sunset times according to the location, that is closest city, that you select when you do select the time zone that way. And also, on a kind of a whim, I added a day-night indicator as well, just so that you can see with a cute little icon whether it's day or night in that particular location. I also added a help file, finally, and for version 5, 0.5, which I released only about a month after 0.4, I added keyboard support, which means you can actually operate the program, navigate through it, and so on entirely with the keyboard, or you should be able to. And I also added a long-desired feature where you can actually reorder the clock panels that you have without having to delete and recreate them. And finally, I implemented a number of drawing improvements in terms of the graphical rendering, so there are some visual glitches that have been eliminated, and the kind of rendering process should be hopefully a little more efficient as well. So now, if you haven't ever seen or used Universal Clock, you might not know exactly what I'm talking about here. There's a sample screenshot of it there, but why don't I actually just fire up Windows VM here and show you what it looks like in its current incarnation. So, Universal Clock, I originally wrote this program because I wanted a simple utility that would let me display different the times in different time zones around the world. And I know there were a couple of programs for OS2 that have done this in the past, but honestly I wasn't particularly happy with how they worked, or with the limited features that they had. So I sat down and wrote Universal Clock, and I've gradually been tinkering with it over the last several years, kind of in my free time. So it's a very simple program. When you first start it, it just looks like this. This is the default appearance, but you can customize it very heavily. So by default, it has 2 clock panels, and this program is built around clock panels. So each of these panels here is an instance of the clock panel class, which is written as a window class, and I deliberately wrote it so that it would be easy to take this panel control and embed it in other applications, or maybe Xenter widgets or something. Now, I haven't actually written any other applications or widgets that do this, but given the design of the program, it should actually be fairly easy to do that. Or if anybody else wants to take this code and try embedding these clock panels in another program or widget, they're more than welcome to do so. The source code is on my GitHub site. The link is there. Anyway, looking at how you configure these clock panels, by default there are 2, one for your local time and one for UTC time. And they use your current locale conventions for formatting date and time. But you can customize these, so each one has its own context menu, and you don't actually require the mouse to click on them anymore. You can also use the keyboard to tab. It's probably a little hard to see the selection cursor on this resolution of this video, but trust me, it's there. So you can tab between clock panels, use the arrow keys to select the individual fields. Now, by default, selecting the fields doesn't do anything because the default configuration doesn't really have anything set up there. So let's okay, if you open the context menu, you see there's global program settings and clock settings. So the global program settings, fairly simple. You can turn the title bar on and off. You can set a couple of other options, which I may or may not get into. And you can change the arrangement of the clock panel here. So for example, right now they're in single column arrangement. I can change it so that there's 1 clock per column, so it looks like that, and you probably want to resize that a bit. And you can also configure it so that if you resize each clock panel below a certain point, it'll flip over into so-called compact view, and that's what compact view looks like. When you only have 2 side by side like this, it doesn't look terribly good. So let's put it back into single column view and then resize it so it's a little better looking. There we go. So anyway, let's configure these. So I'll go into clock properties for the local time clock, and I can change the description. I can change the time zone, which I'll show you in a second. I can change the formatting convention. So right now the time is formatted using the default for your locale, and this is something that's configured in the OS/2 locale palette, and you can set a custom locale. Some locales have an alternative format, mostly DBCS locales. You can choose that. You can also use the system default, which is not the same as the locale default. It gets a bit confusing. The best way to understand how this stuff works is really just to play around with it. You can also use a custom string, which uses the printf, or rather strf time formatting conventions. And turn off seconds if I want. So now the fun part that I've added in this latest couple of releases is I can now select the time zone, and I select by choosing country and city. So I'm in Canada, and if I select Canada, it shows all of the defined cities in the Canada country definition, and they're prefixed with the continent name, which this case is America, meaning North or South America, and then the city name. So I'm closest to Toronto, and then you can see the geographic coordinates are shown, and I can fine-tune them if I'm not exactly in Toronto, and the time zone TZ values for this time zone, and this controls things like when the daylight saving time changes. So now, I will also change this to Toronto, sort of, because I'm not actually in Toronto, just somewhat close to it. And then, yeah, so here is where I would select the locale for the conventions that would be used if I chose locale default. Now notice there's a coordinates check button. If I just say OK here, okay, notice that, I'll enlarge that. Notice that the seconds have disappeared because I turned those off, and it is now showing in 12-hour time because that's the convention for this locale. Now what happens if I turn on the coordinates? Now actually I didn't, that's a slight glitch. I probably shouldn't have to reselect that, but I can take a look at that. So now the coordinates here, you can see I've enabled them. What effect does that have exactly? It does this. Because this clock now knows the geographic coordinates of this location, it can calculate what the sunrise and sunset times are. So, something is not quite right here. Let's see what's going on. There we go. Something went a bit glitchy there. This is still a bit alpha release software, as you can probably tell. So anyway, it's probably because I didn't set the coordinates and then tried to go back in and set them, and it didn't sync up the settings properly. Anyway, so here you see there's a sun icon. If I click on the date, you can see this is the sunrise and sunset times for this day in this location. This is based on the geographic coordinates. Now this is purely based on latitude and longitude, so it doesn't take altitude into account, meaning that if you're at a higher altitude, these times might be a few minutes off. Let's add another clock, and let's say Germany. Alright, there's only a couple options here. I'll choose Berlin. Enable the coordinates. This time, because, I want the locale to reflect my own preferences, I would probably leave this as ENCA. But if I wanted to, I could change the locale formatting to German and see what it looks like. So that's what the time format and the date format look like according to the German locale conventions. And I did not give this clock a good name, did I? So I will call it Germany. And I'll turn off the seconds because I kind of find those a bit annoying when I'm working with these panels. If I want to know what the seconds are, I can look at the Warp Center. Yeah, so that's basically it. And the sunrise and sunset times are shown there. In compact view, this becomes a little more, well, compact. You still see the icon. Clicking that cycles between the time and the date. You can't see the actual sunrise and sunset times in compact view. I can adjust the position of this split thing, by the way, if I want to. It's in the settings. And I can also customize the appearance of each clock. And, you know, let's say I want, I don't know, sort of a brown background and a, I don't know, bright pink foreground. That's not terribly attractive, but you get the idea. So, yeah, this is Universal Clock. It's you can do all sorts of customization, add up to 16 different clocks, I think. You can change the fonts. Let's change this to something a little more exciting. Well, MMPM Digital. I like to use this one for clocks just because it kind of gives it a nice LCD display vibe to it. And again, each individual clock has its own specific appearance settings. So yeah, that's a quick tour of Universal Clock. As I say, this program's been around for a while, but I've just finally got around to adding some kind of nice features, like this keyboard support, like that city database, so you can select the time zone instead of having to type in the cryptic value, and the sunrise sunset times. So yeah, if you find this sort of thing useful or interesting, check it out. You can download it from my GitHub page, which is, again, the link's there. So yeah, it's Universal Clock. And I will move on to the next item, which is Wnnim for OS2. And I talked about this one in one of my presentations last year, and I even gave a brief demonstration of an early version of it. I've updated it quite a bit since then, and there's a list of the highlights. And if you're not familiar with what this program is, it's basically an input method editor that lets you type in Japanese on any OS2 system, whether it's Japanese or not. And since I study Japanese and have lived on and off in Japan, I find this quite useful. The last couple of releases, since last Warpstock's presentation, I added kanji conversion support. I did demonstrate that at last year's Warpstock, but it wasn't in the publicly available release at the time, which is why I have it listed here. More to the point, I came out with another release much later in the year, 0.03, and this one added a number of new features. For example, I added a Japanese translation for the GUI. I also made major improvements to the positioning and sizing logic, so there's less likelihood of fonts getting kind of cut off or shrunk too small to match up with the surrounding text. I made a few tweaks to better deal with Japanese keyboards, because I personally use an English keyboard because that's what my computer is, but I had a couple of users who are using Japanese keyboards, being in Japan, and they pointed out a couple of things that weren't working quite right. So I actually dug a Japanese keyboard that I had out of storage and plugged that in and figured out how to improve the compatibility with that. I've also packaged this program as an RPM. It's available, it should be available through the download page on this GitHub site, the releases page. And I also made a number of improvements to the Romaji input. I had several people complain that the way you type phonetically wasn't really consistent with how other operating systems tend to do it these days. And the reason for that, I discovered, was in large part because the back end is based on a long pedigree of this software engine that I'm using, which originated on Unix. And the conventions for typing Japanese in English have been evolved slightly differently between Unix systems and other operating systems. So I figured out how to actually modify the conversion tables, so you actually now have the option. You can have the input behave more like Unix, or you can have it behave more like those other OSs. And where did I put my VM? Okay, so I'll give you a very brief demonstration. And I only just installed the software in this VM, so if it doesn't quite work properly, this is why. Okay, actually this is good because I can show you what this error means, because this is a fairly common error if you haven't set things up quite right. Now what this error means is it looks cryptic, but that last sentence is the key. The OS2 code page file might not be installed. And what that means is that when you installed OS2, you did not select the Japanese code pages option. And this is very easy to fix. All you need to do is, if you have the OS2 MCP ECS or ArcaOS CD installed, just go to the directory OS2 image FI font, find the directory on your hard drive on your boot drive called language code page, and on the CD from this directory just unzip jb-codepage.zip to drive C. There we go. That installs the missing code page files. Or, you know, you can use, there's various graphical ways of doing this, but this is really the easiest way to do it. Or you can just make sure you select to install Japanese code pages when you first install the operating system, if you think you're going to want this feature. But maybe that's a little ambitious. So anyway, let's try this now. Okay, I don't have to reboot or anything, it just picks it up, and you might be wondering what happened. Well, it opened a very tiny little window, and it's right here at the bottom of the screen, which is the default location for it. It floats on top, so it shouldn't get hidden behind the X center, mostly. Probably depends on how you have that configured. So it's a very simple user interface. I demonstrated it briefly last year. The new features aren't really that conducive to demonstrations, so I'll just give a very quick generic demonstration of how it works, and leave it at that. So if I want to type in Japanese, well, I don't actually have the Japanese code page selected or a Japanese font installed here, so demonstrating this now probably isn't going to get you much in the way of very interesting Japanese text. As you can see, it's typing in Japanese, but since I'm not running under the Japanese code page with a Japanese font, it looks like gobbledygook. But what I can do is show you the kanji conversion, and that's that button. So now if I type, it's typing in a special overlay, and the reason it shows up as Japanese is because this little overlay window uses Unicode for rendering. And what I will do is, so yeah, you basically type in your phonetic characters, then you hit space for the conversion, it converts it, you hit enter, and it adds it to the window, and of course it goes into ASCII-looking garbage because the actual editor is not using a Japanese font, but you get the idea. Anyway, if you're interested in this program and want to know more about it, you can find out more information on the GitHub site, again, the link is in my slide here. And I will just close that. So now, let's move on a bit. And, okay, the next item that I worked on was, I did a minor new release of the FreeType 2 installable font driver for OS 2. And if you don't know what this is, basically it's a replacement for the TrueType font driver in Presentation Manager. This was originally written by Mikhail Nechsek and later by Ko Myung-hun from Korea, and I've kind of sort of accidentally inherited it. So yeah, it basically uses the open source FreeType library to render fonts in Presentation Manager. And this is not the same as the FreeType library that's used by applications. That's a separate thing. This one just affects fonts that are rendered by Presentation Manager's own controls, basically. And this release, 1.36, came out a couple months ago. And the main change here, well, two main changes. First of all, it fixed some broken name lookup issues with certain DBCS fonts that come with some versions of OS 2 and which have completely broken name tables. So I had to add some ugly workarounds to deal with that. And I've also adjusted the help logic in the configuration GUI so that it can deal with multiple languages. Hang on, come back here. Without having to actually physically replace the help file. So there's not really much to show here, but I'll just, if you're not familiar with what I mean by the configuration GUI, it is installed by default with ArcaOS, and it's under Appearance FreeType 2 settings. You just see a few. Most people will not ever want to change any of these settings, honestly, but in case you do, they're here. There's online help, and it now picks up your current language. So, yeah. And the current version is 1.36. So that's just a minor update, in case anybody's interested. So the next thing that I'm going to mention is the LAN server installer. This is something that I wrote several years ago, and kind of in cooperation with OS2 Voice. The current iteration of this, I'm not sure if Voice has actually put this up on their website yet, but because they basically handle the distribution of it. But the source code is in the NetLabs repository, and there's a link there if you really want to look at it, but you need VxRax to build it, so I'm not sure how useful that is to everybody, but the source code is there. So what this program is, if you're not familiar with it, it basically lets you install LAN server on MCP or ECS or ArcaOS. And LAN server being obviously the main component of Warp server, which is the server side of what something like File and Print Client would talk to. It lets you define network servers, domains, and so on. So the latest update that I made to this was very minor. Basically, I tweaked it so that you can actually now install LAN server not just from ACP or Warp Server for eBusiness, which was what it originally was designed for, but you can actually install the version of LAN server that comes with Warp Server version 4 as well. Because there are some people or some organizations who have licenses for Warp Server version 4 and never really bothered to update to Warp Server for eBusiness. But they have a modern OS2 platform distribution like ArcaOS, and they want to be able to install LAN server on it. Yeah, you can do that now. IBM does not have any support or technical barriers to doing this, or even licensing ones. In fact, they have in the past published white papers describing how to do this, so they're obviously fine with it. So yeah, this is just a minor update. Some people might find it useful, and if you don't find it useful, well, good for you. And so that is the 4 software products that I've updated that were existing products. And actually, if you want to see what this program looks like, just to remind you, it's not a terribly interesting looking thing. It's just, this is what it looks like. LAN server installation. You need to have the Warp server CD installed. Now, I don't, so as soon as I hit install, it's just going to say, hey, this is not a Warp server CD, please insert one. And you can set all the basic options for what type of server you want to install, what features you want to install. There's a bunch of them. I'm not going to go into what they are. You can set various advanced options. If you don't have a NetBIOS protocol installed, it will tell you when you start this program, and it'll offer to launch the Adapters and Protocols program so that you can install one. If you have Peer installed, it will complain and tell you, look, you can't install Warp Server at the same time as Peer, so please uninstall Peer before you continue. So, it's moderately intelligent, even if it's not the most sophisticated program in the world. But anyway, that's basically what it does. So, the last program that I want to talk about today is, where are you? TCP/IP Advanced Features Installer. That's a bit of a mouthful, I'm sorry. I've had people complain that I don't come up with very catchy names for some of my software. I'm sorry. It's just the way it is. So I actually wrote this program basically this month, and I have not even released binaries of it yet, although it's pretty much ready to do so. The source code I've already committed to the NetLabs VX Apps repository. Again, it's written in VXREX, so unfortunately there aren't a huge number of people out there who could probably compile this, but, well, it is what it is. So what does this program do? It enables you to install the advanced or server-oriented features of IBM TCP/IP for OS/2. Now, TCP/IP, as packaged with MCP, including ECS and ArcaOS, includes a whole lot of features which are really designed for running on servers or in special environments that most people installing a normal OS/2 client would not need or want. The ArcaOS installer does not expose most of these, nor in most cases does the installer for Ecom Station, nor, I believe, does the MCP installer, or at least... Actually, I think the MCP installer exposes the NFS and SecureWay features, but you kind of have to go into some of the advanced options for that. But none of these client platforms will offer to let you install the other one, which is the DHCP server collection. But there's actually no technical reason you can't install these. As I say, they're included on the MCP CD. They don't. There's no technical barrier. You can actually run the SID installer for them, and they will install quite happily. There's no version check or anything. There is a version check if you try to run the TCP/IP client wrapper installer. That does look for a server syslevel file, but if you use the feature installer directly, it doesn't do any check. So, but for that reason, I assume that the check is there really just to prevent people who have the client from getting themselves into trouble if they don't really need these features. But anyway, if you have my new TCP/IP Advanced Features installer, you have the opportunity now to install all of these three items. The DHCP server package, which includes DDNS and BinL servers, and if you don't know what those are, you probably don't need them, as well as the NFS server, which is compatible with NFS, that is Network File System version 3, and NFS client, and also something called the SecureWay VPN client, or the Secure Remote IP client, as it's called in the desktop icons. And this is not a general purpose VPN client. It only works with an AIX SecureWay firewall VPN, which probably does not exist on many in many infrastructures anymore. But it's there. It's possible some people might want to install it, so I figured why not. So To use the TCP/IP Advanced Features Installer, that is a mouthful, I'm sorry, you need, obviously, the OS2 install CD, which has TCP/IP version 4.3 on it, so any of those clients. It probably also works with TCP/IP 4.1 or 4.21, which were distributed via software choice and a few other things. I have not tested with those, so I can't guarantee that it would work with them, but it probably does. And you can have TCP/IP installed already. In fact, the assumption is that you do, so it just adds these features to it. Now, on the off chance that you don't have TCP/IP installed already, that is to say the TCP/IP application package, you can install the whole thing, but honestly, in most cases, you would be using this program on a system like an installed MCP system or ECS or ArcaOS, where you install the TCP/IP base software with the operating system. You just want to add these features after the fact. That's kind of the use case for this. So, enough chattering. I'll actually show you what it looks like. So, first of all, on drive S, I do have the ArcaOS install DVD here. So, I've got this thing on drive D. The program name is tcpsinst, and it's a very simple program. This is what it looks like. Now, because TCP/IP is already installed, it just shows you the current location of it. It detects the ArcaOS install disk and automatically pre-selects the drive that it's in. You can select a different drive if you want, and then you just select the items that you want to install, and really that's it. Yeah, I mean, I might as well install all of them. And yeah, just confirms that it's going to install it, and it just, you've probably seen this program before, this progress bar before. It's part of Feature Installer. And yeah, it just installs the files that are needed for these features, updates config.sys, tweaks the desktop, and then tells you to reboot. And it will put the icons in wherever your TCP/IP folder is. So if you're running ArcaOS, it'll be under Network in System Setup, TCP/IP, and you can see it's added the DDNS Server Services folder, DHCP Server Services folder, which includes the binl server, and the Secure Remote IP Client configuration. It has also added the NFS driver to config.sys, and after rebooting, you would notice if you ran the TCP/IP config notebook that you now have the option of configuring the NFS server, and I'm not sure if you actually need to reboot before those show up or not. Let's just take a quick look. Yeah, there it is, the NFS tab. You can configure the NFS server here. So yeah, the NFS client is basically a bunch of command line tools. There is various help for it from IBM. There are no desktop icons for it. It's like if you know how to use it, or if you need to use it, you'll probably be told how to use it. If not, it's probably not something you should be messing with anyway. So that's that. Okay, so that's basically a quick overview of some of the stuff that I've been working on. Hopefully some of you might find some of these things interesting, and once we go live for questions, I'll be happy to take them. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Anyway.
Yeah, the question are there any questions for Alex? One thing that's fun to see is that people always thought that they needed to have the Cliffy installer from IBM and Netscape 461 installed to install some of these applications, but with the proper code you can just generate the response file yourself and then install those applications. And just before the video was over, just a small reminder for everybody. You can install the NFS client from IBM. However, there have been reports in the past that the NFS client from IBM, when you connect to certain NFS servers and you then open that drive letter via the workplace shell, that the system can crash. So just, it might work for you, it might not. It might not work. So if you need if you need an alternative, you can use NetDrive. So I just want to mention that not that people see their system go up in a puff of smoke, but chances of it are small.
Yeah, two things. First of all, yeah, I make no promises about how usable any of these components are. But also, main reason that I wanted this feature was I was looking at setting up OS2 as an NFS server, and I actually realized, looking through the old OS2 documentation for convenience package, that it actually does include the NFS server. So I thought that was kind of an interesting feature that some people might want to play with. So yeah, I threw that in, and I also threw in the IBM Secure Remote IP client, even though I can't imagine anybody would really find it useful in this day and age. But I mean, it's available, so why not, right?
I think
I should mention, of course, goes without saying, these are all personal software projects. They are neither developed by, nor sponsored by, nor recommended by ArcaOS or OS2 Voice or anyone. Well, except for the server installer in the case of OS2 Voice, or anyone else. So just be aware of that. These are my personal software projects.
I think the LAN server utility also comes with a fat disclaimer that if you want to run LAN server or use an SMB1 client, general IT warning, SMB1 is deprecated and is littered with security holes. That sounds a bit rude, but that's the general read of any IT professional. So you're better off using Samba server, I think, if you want to use it. So
there are some environments and some certain applications where you do kind of need LAN server, especially in certain enterprise environments which have a particular need for it. Again, that's one reason I think that OS2 Voice wanted to make this available. Isn't that right, Roderick?
Yes. And I've recently known one customer from the United States that has a small company, and they actually installed LAN server with it on top of ArcaOS. So
yeah, and that's perfectly possible with this tool. Obviously, it's not something that ArcaOS is going to be taking over support for, but in terms of running the server component. But again, that's why Voice distributes it, so you can do it with that. You're more than capable, right, Roderick?
Yeah, I've already provided some support. I see there's a question from Martin. Yeah, that link that you have posted that points to articles os2voice.org to the serve-ins zip file, that is not the latest version, but the only difference that Alex made in the version is that HPFS 386 isn't installed with LAN server. But if you install Aurora convenience pack on top of ArcaOS, that should work. I haven't updated that version on the website yet, so.
Yeah, and Sandra is saying if you've got Warp Server in brackets 3 Advanced SMP, yeah, that's the version that basically is now supported. It's called Warp Server 4. It's actually Warp 3 running LAN Server 5. I guess they kind of averaged out the version numbers to come up with that. And the SMP version is a slight update of that. They both basically run LAN Server 5. So yeah, you can install it. You can install that version of LAN server with this version of the utility. The previous version was not really tested for that. There is a slight, I won't go into HPFS 386 issues. We really don't recommend that you try running HPFS 386 on any modern system these days, because it's not likely to work very well. Hold on.
Your question?
NFS, yeah, from Andy. According to the documentation, the NFS driver that's included with TCP/IP 4.3, it is allegedly NFS version 3. I don't know how to confirm that or not, but that's what it says. So yeah. And NFS version 2, that is quite old. Any other questions? Oh, another thing about the LAN server installer. I think I mentioned this to you before, Roderick. It is a little hard to find on the Voice website.
Yeah, I know. I'll try and come up with a better page for it. The Joomla page doesn't have a easy index where you can see all of the postings in a short overview. But I did put it in the category software, so I'll make a note of that and see how I can reorganize that.
Okay. We have a little bit of time left. Actually, I have a thought just occurred to me. 1 second. How do you... Unfortunately, Skype has, as they often do, totally changed a lot of their user interface. So I just thought I might want to show you, because when I was doing the demonstration earlier, I didn't have the fonts set up quite right for that IME. So I'll show you what it's actually supposed to look like here. So if you have a text editor, or really anything that can display, or that can be configured for use in Japanese fonts, to get the Japanese text to display, you still have to run the application under the Japanese code page. So I reconfigured this VM to enable code page 932. So to show you how this works, I'll just switch the code page to 932, then text editor here. Make sure that I've got a font that's actually capable of displaying in Japanese, and that is tiny. There we go. So that's what it is actually supposed to look like. That's purely phonetic input and the kanji conversion. I'll put it on the same line so you can see how it lines up. Oops. I can never remember the key combination. There we go. That's what it actually looks like when you're running under the Japanese code page with a Japanese font. So just to kind of finish off what I was demonstrating earlier. So that's basically that. I don't think there's much else that I can really usefully show you at this point. So are there any final questions before I ring off? I guess it's getting close to end of day for you guys in Europe.
Nah, it's 7:50 p.m. here, so it's not late in the night yet. The sun is shining here still, so.
Okay. Well,
Okay.
Any more questions? I don't see any here. Anything on that side?
No, I don't see anything here either. And the last question was asked 2 minutes ago, so I guess that wraps that up.
Okay. Good. Well then, I hope some of this was interesting, and I'll have more to say in my last presentation tomorrow, I guess. So until then, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Alex. Okay, bye-bye. Okay, that was the first day of Warpstock Virtual. Something new for me as well, but although to some extent. We'll be back tomorrow at 3 p.m. Dutch time, 9 a.m. New York time, and will be available on the same channel and on the same IRC channel for your questions. Thanks for joining us. As I said, for people that had missed that explanation, there have been fewer presentations compared to previous years because I've been hit in full month of April by a mild form of what seems to be a COVID infection, COVID-19, which made me do a whole lot less on Warpstock than I had anticipated. Hopefully next year you will be able to meet probably in the third week of May in the youth hostel that we had planned to organize Warpstock. But that all depends on how this epidemic unfolds. Okay, as they now usually always say around the world, stay healthy and see you all tomorrow. Thank you for attending, and look at warpstock.eu for the program, which presentations are online tomorrow. And I think OS2 again has a future that is still there, certainly with the UEFI development. Enjoy dinner, enjoy lunch, sleep well, and see you tomorrow. This is Nijkerk Net